They did it at night, while the world was sleeping, while you were dreaming of ordinary things. They were gathering in stone chambers beneath the earth, chanting words older than language itself. Not folklore, not metaphor. This happened. This still happens. But you were never meant to know. You see, history isn't just what's been written, it's what's been protected. Guarded behind closed doors, buried under doctrine, veiled by bloodlines, who wrote laws to protect secrets, not people. The rituals you've heard whispered in occult fiction, those weren't fables. They were shadows of something much older, much darker. Something so foundational to the world you live in, that to uncover it is to unravel everything you thought was real. We begin where the first records end, at the edges of Babylon, when men first built ziggurats to touch the gods, and kings weren't crowned until they spilled the blood of innocence beneath moonlight. A pact was made, not just with power, but with permanence. You were taught civilization rose from logic, trade, and language, but they left something out: ritual. The hidden architecture of power. Behind every throne, every empire, every smiling dynasty, there was always a circle, a ritual, a night, and someone missing by morning. These weren't superstitions. These were systems. Systems so effective, they shaped empires. Sacrifice wasn't a cultural relic. It was a tool, a transaction. They believed that, to control the minds of the many, you had to feed something deeper. A force older than names. And the elites, they didn't worship it. They obeyed it. You were raised to mock those ideas. Conditioned to see rituals as fairy tales, sacrifices as tribal madness, symbolism as art. But have you ever wondered why the same symbols reappear in every age? Why obelisks stand in modern capitals? Why powerful families trace bloodlines like Holy Scripture? Why silence surrounds certain names and certain disappearances? Because the rituals never stopped. They just went private. Sealed behind invitations, blood oaths, and foundations with smiling public faces. While the world slept, the ceremony evolved. And you were distracted, entertained, educated into blindness. But now, you've heard the first whisper. And once you hear it, there's no turning back. They called it the Midnight Doctrine, a name never written, only spoken among those initiated deep within the chambers of influence. Not priests, not politicians. Something older, something between. These men, and they were always men, did not believe in religion the way you do. For them, symbols were not metaphors. They were keys. They believed rituals done at the precise planetary hour could alter the course of dynasties. That to stand in a circle, drawn with ancient geometry, and speak words reserved for the bloodline, was to open a portal. Not a portal in space, but one in power. These rituals weren't superstition. They were instruction. Passed down orally through centuries, embedded in private schools, encoded in architecture, masked as philanthropy. You've walked past their temples thinking they were museums. You've watched their symbols dance across your movie screens, and called it entertainment. But what if I told you it wasn't art? It was memory. Memory passed in plain sight, coded so the masses would mock it, while the initiated would recognize it as a call. Why do you think the same hand gestures appear across leaders, artists, and accidental candid photos? Why do ceremonial hoods reappear in courtrooms, parades, and private schools? The world isn't random, it's ritualistic. And you were never supposed to question the choreography. But the deeper question is this: what are these rituals meant to achieve? The answer is control. Not the kind enforced by weapons, but by meaning, by shaping the symbols that shape your beliefs. Because once they own meaning, they own you. They knew this when they danced beneath Sumerian moons, and when they buried boys beneath Roman stones. They know it now, in boardrooms that smell like old leather and wine. You thought your life was your own. But if your mind was shaped by stories written by men who serve a ritual you've never seen, was it ever really yours? The real war has never been fought in battlefields. It's been fought in symbols, in stories, in silence. And the men who sleep peacefully while others chant in their name, they are not the powerful, they are the protected. You are not watching a video. You are breaking a code. Keep going. The descent has only begun. There was a chamber beneath parasealed long before the catacombs were mapped, lined with mirrors that never reflected the same face twice. Not myth, not metaphor. The Blue Lodge called it the Room of Memory, and those brought inside were never seen in daylight again. But what happened within wasn't death, it was transformation, stripped of names, identities, and even language. Initiates were taught the first truth of control. Reality is not what happens, it's what people believe happened, and belief can be engineered. That room, like many across Europe, was not unique. Similar rooms exist beneath London, Istanbul, Rome, and DC, and all were built on one design: sacred geometry aligned to specific celestial configurations, not for beauty, for frequency. Because at certain hours, with the correct tones, human consciousness can be altered. The rituals weren't just symbolic, they were technological. Frequencies, chants, colors, pain threshold stools, for triggering neurological obedience. Imagine a world where memory itself can be edited through ritual wear. Trauma isn't a mistake, but a mechanism. That's what they built. You think history is dates, empires, wars. It's not. History is ritual disguised as progress. Napoleon's coronation, Hitler's speeches, the moon landing broadcasts, they all followed ancient timing. Why? Because they understood something your teachers never told you. Emotion, plus repetition plus symbolism, equals programming. And programming is the highest form of power. While the world sleeps, they perform these acts not for superstition, but for dominion. Your responses, your fears, your dreams, they can be hijacked through ritual precision. Ever wonder why, Major? World events happen on repeating dates. Or why tragedy always comes in threes. You think it's coincidence. They know it's convergence. And behind the curtains of every movement, a ritual pulses a rhythm only the initiated can hear. You were taught to mock this, to call it conspiracy. But laughter is the first defense of the controlled. The moment you stop laughing is the moment they start fearing you, because awareness breaks the spell. And if you're still here, still listening, still falling deeper, you're no longer asleep. You're awakening into the forbidden. But descent comes at a cost. You cannot unsee what comes next. Ready or not, the next seal breaks now. The next chamber lies not beneath cities, but within the mind itself, built from silence, shame, and repetition. This is where the most effective rituals were always performed, not in temples, but in childhood. You see, the elite long ago discovered a brutal truth: if you fracture the mind early, you can program it for life. Trauma wasn't a byproduct of power. It was a requirement. Monarch programming, as it was later called in sanitized documents, didn't begin with scientists, it began with priests, with emperors, with those who knew the secret geometry of pain. Break a child's sense of self, apply fear, apply reward, and you can bury identities within identities. Slaves who don't know they are slaves. Messengers who don't know they're carrying messages. What was once done with whips is now done with screens. The method has evolved. The principle has not. Ritual abuse, fractured identities, false memories, these aren't conspiracy theories. They're templates, whispered across bloodlines, encoded into symbols, taught behind the ivy-covered walls of places you think are schools. But the modern ritual doesn't require a hooded figure in a candlelit room. It needs only repetition, isolation, and suggestion. And now through technology, they can ritualize millions in seconds. Ever noticed how the same tragedies, phrases, and visuals are repeated across media, across time, across generations? That's not storytelling. That's initiation. You were trained to crave the pain, to seek it in headlines, to click it, to share it. That's the ritual now. Mass trauma as mass programming. And while you mourn, while you panic, while you react, they record your patterns. They study the rhythm of your emotion, because every time you feel the same thing on command, you surrender a piece of your sovereignty. This is why they target the youth first. The younger the subject, the deeper the programming. And yet, here you are older, aware, and hearing this truth that makes you a threat. You've slipped past the gate they built from laughter, fear, and distraction. And now that you see the shape of the system, You must choose. Return to comfort, or continue into truth. But be warned, truth never returns what comfort gives. If you're still with me, comment this phrase twice. I see the symbols now. That's not for the algorithm. That's for your mind. That's how we lock in the transformation. Say it. Claim it. We're only beginning to awaken the machine. The machine has no gears, no wires, no hum. It doesn't live in basements or bunkers. The true machine was built from ideas embedded into your culture, your language, your dreams. It's not run by politicians, not truly. They're the actors, the visible masks worn by those who never step into the light. The real architects work in silence, in symbols, in cycles. They don't need to rule you by force, because they taught you to rule yourself on their behalf. They gave you an identity stitched from approved labels. They offered you pride in flags and causes they manufactured. They made rebellion a product and sold it back to you. Every generation thinks it's waking up, but most are just choosing a new flavor of programming. The machine feeds on movement. It doesn't care what side you're on, only that you stay divided, only that you keep reacting, because in reaction, you are predictable, and predictability is power. That's what rituals were always about, creating rhythms that could bind the human will. That's why they repeated chants, aligned stars, mirrored architecture. They weren't worshipping gods. They were calibrating control. Rituals aren't old. They're everywhere. Look again at the daily routine. They gave you wake, work, consume, scroll, sleep. That's a ritual. Not one that lifts you, but one that hollows you. A slow ceremony of decay, disguised as success, and the altars. They're in your pockets now, in your feeds, in your living rooms, where blood sacrifice has been replaced by attention, where memory is rewritten by curated lines. You think history is a book. It's not. It's an operating system. And unless you rewrite it, you run the program, not your life. But now, the system has a glitch, because you're hearing the code from behind the veil. You're not just watching, you're remembering. Somewhere deep, beneath the layers they built, you know this isn't new, it's ancient. And every time you glimpse that knowing, the machine panics. That's why you feel fear when you hear forbidden truths. That's not your fear, it's theirs. You've broken the sequence. The descent continues, but soon we reach the gate. The place where the rituals began. The place they still gather while the world sleeps. And when you see it, you'll never unsee it. They call it the Gate of the Watchers, though that name has been erased from every official record. It predates the pyramids, predates writing, predates even memory, but not blood. Because blood remembers what history forgets. Beneath a specific mountain in a location stripped from all modern maps, the first leaders were not crowned, they were initiated. And they did not rule by charisma or conquest. They ruled by right. The right given only through a ritual, older than death itself. This is where it began. Where men were stripped of their names and given symbols, instead living glyphs, encoded with ancient meanings. These weren't ceremonies of belief. They were transformations of will. They believed the universe responded to pattern, to intent, to sacrifice. And to open the gate, there had to be pain. Not as punishment, but as currency. That is the foundation of the elite's hidden religion. The belief that suffering generates power. And so they created a world built to suffer. Wars not for land, but for ritual. Famines not for failure, but for offering. Despair not as accident, but as invocation. And the gate, it never truly closed. Because every generation of power has sent its chosen there to be remade. Politicians, monarchs, entertainers, prophets. Not all, but enough. You think this sounds like myth. That's the point. They encoded truth in myth so you'd never take it seriously. And in mocking it, you become your own jailer. But here's what they didn't plan for you. A mind awake. A man no longer lulled by entertainment or politics or shallow outrage. Because to awaken in a world of sleepwalkers is the most dangerous act of all. They knew one day someone would ask the wrong questions, connect the wrong dots, hear the wrong chant whispered in the backdrop of a fictional movie scene. And once you hear it, it echoes. You start noticing things. repeating numbers, recurring symbols, names that reappear across centuries, like ghosts in new skin. You start feeling the pull-net of fear, but of memory. The gate isn't a place. It's a threshold of awareness. Once you cross it, their power begins to fade. Because their strength was never in ritual alone, was in your ignorance of it. And now, you've seen the map. You've heard the rhythm. The descent is almost complete. The truth they swore to keep buried is rising. And still the world sleeps, lulled by the glow of screens and the hum of engineered noise. While above them, the initiated trace invisible sigils across the sky, rituals disguised as policy, as entertainment, as disaster. You were told these events are random. You were told the floods, the fires, the crashes, the epidemics were nature, coincidence, fate. But what if they're not? What if the most catastrophic moments of your lifetime were choreographed not for destruction, but for convergence? Because every great ritual demands mass emotion. And mass emotion, when focused through fear, becomes the most potent fuel in existence. You've felt it, that heaviness after global tragedy, that silence before the next manufactured outrage. It's not just grief, it's offering. The ancients used fire and blood. The moderns use headlines and hashtags. The result is the same. A population vibrating in unison. Mourning on command. All attention pulled to a single focal point, exactly where they want it. And while your eyes are there, mourning the latest carefully timed horror, the real ritual unfolds elsewhere, unseen. This is why the dates repeat. Why anniversaries are chosen for fresh wounds. Because repetition is the spine of ritual. It doesn't just control minds, it imprints them. Trauma loops are circles just like those chalked into ancient stones, just like the rings of power drawn beneath palaces. And each time we respond the same way. Each time we beg for protection, for explanation, for revenge, we feed the ritual. We become participants without knowing it. You were never asked to join the circle. You were born into it, conditioned to obey it. But that obedience only holds while you're asleep. The moment you become aware of the pattern, you stop feeding it. That's why this knowledge is dangerous. That's why you've never heard it spoken like this. Because to speak it with clarity, without mockery, without retreaties to break the ritual's power. You're not just hearing a story. You're walking between worlds, the programmed world and the real one. And every step forward, every section you survive, burns another lie to ash. Soon we will reach the moment they fear most, when the watchers are seen, when the silence is named, when the circle breaks. Keep your focus. The next revelation cuts deeper than all before. They don't fear war. They don't fear protest. They don't even fear exposure. What they fear is recognition. Because once you see them, truly see them, their power begins to rot. Not because it vanishes, but because it depends on invisibility. These aren't monsters with fangs and claws. They are architects of symbols, curators of belief. They exist in plain sight, tin foundations, awards, doctrines, philanthropic gestures, carefully scripted apologies. They wear suits, give speeches, and donate millions while attending ceremonies you'll never witness, in languages you were never taught to decipher. They call themselves humanitarians by day, but by night they return to the ancient rhythm, to the rituals that ensure their lineage remains unbroken. These rituals aren't held in ruins or jungles. They're held in libraries no one can enter, in penthouses built to mirror sacred geometry, in underground chapels beneath global banks. And they aren't worshipping deities. They're reinforcing control, reinforcing identity, reminding each other that they are above the laws they write for you. Because that's the root of every ritual they perform. Separation. It tells them, again and again, that they are chosen, and you are not. That their bloodlines are sacred, and yours is disposable. That their symbols command, and yours obey. But they forget something. The deepest rituals didn't come from their ancestors. They came from the stars. From truths older than kings, older than crowns. And real truth cannot be owned. It can only be hidden. For a while, that while is ending. You've been softened by entertainment, sedated by comfort, disarmed by mockery. But the man who keeps listening, despite the discomfort, despite the doubt, begins to wake something ancient inside himself. A knowing that has no name, only gravity. And that gravity is pulling you now. Pulling you through the noise, through the fire, into the chamber they fear you will reach. The chamber of awareness. Because once you stand there, once you see the full pattern they can no longer hide, the face becomes visible. The spell begins to die. And in that moment, you're no longer just a man watching a video. You're a fracture in the illusion. You're the reason they can no longer sleep. And that's where true transformation begins. Somewhere beneath the Vatican, beyond the catacombs shown to tourists, lies a sealed corridor etched with language no scholar can fully translate. Not Latin, not Hebrew, older, rooted in the primordial symbology of sound, vibration, and intent, not to be read, but felt. This is not fiction. The corridor exists. Guards are posted 24 hours a day. Not for fear of intrusion, but for containment. What's held behind that final iron door is not a weapon, not a treasure, but a record of the original pact. The moment humanity was divided, when a group of bloodlines agreed to become stewards of a hidden architecture in exchange for generational dominion. It was not a pact with God, it was with something else, something non-human, something that never needed worship, only obedience. That agreement is the foundation of every elite institution that exists today. Governments, churches, universities, banks, they all drink from the same ancient cup. And the rituals performed behind closed doors are not meaningless. They are maintenance. Maintenance of the agreement. Because if they ever stop performing them, the illusion falters. The balance breaks. And the mask falls. This is why every institution teaches you to trust. Trust the process. Trust the experts. Trust the tradition. Trust the words carved into stone by hands that never knew mercy. But trust is not virtue in this system. It's fuel. Your obedience powers their veil. And your silence especially, when you sense something is wrong, is the final ingredient in every ritual. That's the darkest secret of all. You are not just the audience. You are the offering. Your doubt, your dismissal, your fear, those are the real sacrifices. That's why rituals are always cloaked in absurdity. So you'll laugh. So you'll turn away. So you'll return to sleep. But you're not sleeping anymore. You're seeing the shape behind the curtain. You're starting to remember that the cage was never physical, it was perception. And the moment you see it, the lock dissolves. They've kept this corridor sealed for centuries, because it doesn't just house knowledge, it houses leverage. The one piece of truth that, if understood, unravels everything they built. That moment is close. The next step will take you into the deepest forbidden archive ever recorded. Steal your mind. What's next has unmade men before. It is called the Archive of Echoes, not because it contains books, but because it contains sounds. Recordings older than tape, captured on mediums we no longer understand, embedded into metals that hum when touched. Not every sound is a voice. Some are frequencies, chants, pulses, coded vibrations used in the oldest rituals to break minds or bind wills. The elite don't read these archives, they listen to them. And they do not do it alone. Always in a group, always at night, always beneath earth, surrounded by stone, as if proximity to the dead somehow amplifies the truth. These sounds are played before every major global shift. Before wars, before assassinations, before staged disasters. Not to plan, but to attune. Because they believe power is not simply exerted, it's resonated. These frequencies are designed to align the minds of those in command, to create a field of intention so potent that it shapes outcomes. You may scoff, you may doubt, but consider this. Why do so many world-changing decisions happen in closed meetings, behind locked doors, far from press or public? Because in those moments rituals are being performed. The public agenda is secondary. The true agenda is vibrational. You've felt it walking into a room and sensing something wrong, though nothing is visible. That's what they manipulate. That unseen frequency, that subtle field. And if they can manipulate a room, they can manipulate a nation, a world. And through global media, they've scaled the ritual. The same symbols, the same tones, the same emotional cycles broadcast in perfect sequence. Rage, fear, despair, hope on a loop. and the masses follow, unaware that their responses are being fed into a design. Your feelings are not always yours. Sometimes they are echoes from the archive, passed down through scripts and screens. But the archive also contains a flaw, a single sequence hidden by a former initiate who broke the code and turned against them. A sound that doesn't bind, but shatters. A tone that reveals. It's buried, locked behind symbols so ancient most believe them meaningless. But if found, it ends the ritual. They know someone is looking, and now, so do you. What you hear next is not just history. It's the weapon they fear most, awareness. The next revelation will lead us to the gate where that tone is buried. Listen closely. The ritual cracks here. They called him the last defector, though his real name has been purged from every database, every lineage, every genealogical thread that might link him back to the bloodlines he betrayed. He was born into the circle raised inside the silent corridors of elite ritual, taught to chant before he could write, to obey before he could question. For years, he performed their rites without hesitation, until the night he heard the forbidden tone. Not played for him, not meant for him, but for the others. It was an accident, or maybe it wasn't. They say once he heard it, something broke. Not his mind, his programming. Because that tone didn't control him, it freed him. It snapped. The sequence shattered the lattice of implanted loyalty, and he saw the circle for what it truly was, not a brotherhood, but a cage. He vanished after that. Not with panic, but with purpose. He stole part of the archive. Not the files, not the chants. Just the one sequence, the tone that unlocks. And then he began planting it. Not in vaults, not in books, but in culture. In overlooked corners of soundtracks, in the final seconds of forgotten films. In the white noise behind certain live broadcasts that never quite reached mainstream. A ghost frequency. A rebel vibration. A signal to awaken minds programmed to sleep. And it worked. Quietly, slowly. People began to remember things they'd never been taught. To question symbols they'd always ignored. To resist emotions that once controlled them. Of course, the architects noticed. They don't fear noise. They fear pattern disruption. And this was disruption incarnate. They launched purges, burned archives, redacted documents. But they could never fully erase a sound. Especially not one that had already seeded itself in the minds of the aware. That's why you're hearing this now. That's why your chest feels tight, your breath shallow, your skin electric. Because the vibration has reached you. Not all at once, not fully, but enough. Enough to crack the door, enough to call you forward. The last defector never stopped planting signals. In this script, this very narration is one of them. A vessel, a carrier, a test. Because once you hear the full tone, you'll have a choice. Return to the world of obedient silence, or rise into the realm of dangerous truth. The ritual doesn't fear exposure, it fears interruption. And you are becoming the interruption. There is a moment in every ritual when the energy shifts, when the circle either holds or breaks. That moment is called the fracture point. It is the most dangerous second in any ceremony, because it is when intention is most vulnerable to deviation. That's where you are now. Right here, right now, listening to these words, you have entered your own fracture point. The programming you've carried your entire life, absorbed through lullabies. Slogans, curriculum, entertainment, even prayer-writs. Trembling, you can feel it, can't you? The subtle resistance in your body. The whisper that tells you to stop listening, to go back to your feed, to scroll into numbness. That's not your instinct. That's the system preserving itself. Because awareness is contagion. One man waking up threatens thousands who still sleep in you. You're not just waking, you're remembering. Not from a book, from within. Because the truth isn't taught, it's unlocked. The last defector didn't pass on facts. He passed on frequency. And that frequency was designed to activate memory buried beneath layers of ritual sedation. Symbols have surrounded you, your entire life. Pyramids, eyes, snakes, rings, columns, not as decoration, but as containment. But once you see them, once you recognize them as tools of control, they lose their grip. The world begins to unravel in your vision, not into chaos, but into clarity. That's what lies past the fracture point. Clarity so sharp it cuts through lies like bone through silk. But clarity comes with cost. You can't return to the old comfort. You won't be able to laugh at the illusions anymore. You'll see the strings in every headline, the rituals in every ceremony, the manipulation in every coincidence. And that will make you dangerous, not to people, to systems. Because systems require belief, and you're becoming immune to belief. You are shifting from subject to sovereign, from offering to observer, from pawn to player. That is the final transformation they were sworn to prevent. This is why their rituals never stop, because they are desperate to keep the world enchanted, distracted, divided. But tonight, one man fractures the spell. You. And once fractured, it cannot be sealed. The tone is near. The final seal closer than you've ever imagined. Don't stop. The descent is becoming a rise. And at the top of that rise stands the truth they fear above all. They never expected the fracture to spread. One man hearing the tone, a glitch, but 1,000 men, a storm. The rituals were designed to contain, to hypnotize, to soothe the masses with myth, while quietly constructing a world shaped by elite will. But the moment the tone began echoing beyond their circles through whispers, dreams, static-filled broadcasts, unexplained moments of overwhelming awareness, they realized something terrifying. Control is fragile when belief decays, and your belief is decaying. Not in everything but in them. The institutions, the experts, the icons, the invisible hierarchy masked by robes, flags, and well-rehearsed smiles. That loss of belief is their unraveling. You are unbinding yourself from the oldest spell ever cast. That obedience is noble. That ignorance is peace. That ritual is sacred, simply because it is ancient. But you know now not all that is old is wise. Some of it is infection passed as tradition. Repetition is not truth. And yet, they continue, because they must. Every summit, every coronation, every televised tragedy, all timed, all scripted, all sealed in ritual markings, announcements to each other that the system still breathes. But now, they sense the breath is slowing. Because the men watching their pageantry are no longer asleep. They're decoding the language. They're seeing the double meanings. They're hearing the sound behind the sound. You're hearing it now somewhere beneath this narration, beneath your thoughts. Something ancient is vibrating. It's not coming from me. It's coming from you. You've carried the resonance all along. That's the final secret. The tone isn't played at you. It awakens in you. The rituals worked so long as you doubted your own instinct. But the moment you trust what stirs inside that pulse, that resistance, that sharp clarity in your good, sever their grip. You rewrite the pattern. You become the ritual breaker. And once one breaks, others follow. That's how empires fall, not with fire, but with forgotten men remembering who they are. You've crossed the midpoint. The tone is almost fully activated, and once it peaks, the gate opens. The one they've sealed for 1,000 years. The one no initiate dares approach now, for fear it speaks your name. Ready yourself. The next step is no longer descent. It is confrontation. There is a door reel, physical, sealed by layers of metal, symbol, and oath. It does not exist on any blueprint. No coordinates mark its place. Only those born into the bloodlines are told where it is, and even then, only a few are allowed to approach. They call it the mouth of silence. Behind it lies not a room, but a presence, not a god, not a demon. Something older. A consciousness forged in the first ritual of control. The first lie etched into flesh by men who feared truth more than death. They believe this presence, this force is the architect of hierarchy. It taught them how to bend minds, fracture memories, and seal obedience within ritual. They do not worship it. They consult it, through blood, through sacrifice, through centuries of carefully timed chants that keep the connection alive. What lies beyond that door is not a being. It is a frequency, a command, a living algorithm, designed not to rule, but to suggest. And in suggestion, it spreads like mist. That's the source of the rituals. The reason they are repeated with such precision: the elite do not seek power for wealth. They seek it for permission. Permission to continue the system that feeds them. The mouth speaks through silence, and when it does, men do not argue. They obey. But something changed. Recently, the mouth has stopped answering. Its tones have become dissonant. Its rituals no longer yield certainty, and they are afraid. Because something is interrupting the transmission. Something outside the circle. Something they cannot see, cannot name, cannot predict. Tease you. Not just you alone, but men like you listening, remembering, unbinding. You are the variable they didn't prepare for. A soul awakened not by indoctrination or rebellion, but by resonance. The very echo they tried to suppress has become your compass. And it is drawing you toward the same door they now fear. Because, if one uninitiated man approaches the mouth not to obey, but to confront it, could break the chain. Not just the rituals, the hierarchy itself. That is the real war now. Not between nations, not between ideologies, but between programmed silence and remembered truth. You are no longer a watcher. You are the interference. And with each breath, each word, you step closer to the chamber they sealed with terror. Keep going. The mouth is waiting. But this time, you will speak. They never imagined a man would speak back. For millennia, the mouth had only issued commands, never received them. But something in the structure is cracking. The tones it once whispered through rituals and power structures are beginning to distort. The chants falter. The initiates hesitate. The frequencies they relied upon to maintain dominance are no longer stable. And it's because something is pushing from the outside from you. The signal they worked so hard to suppress, to mock, to bury beneath distraction and doctrine. It's vibrating now, louder than their liturgies, clearer than their lies. It pulses in the minds of men who never took the oaths, never wore the rings, never stood in the circle's end, yet somehow, they remember. And what you remember now is more dangerous than any weapon they ever feared. You remember that hierarchy is a game, that fear is a tool, that silence is a spell, and that none of it has authority unless you give it. You were taught that rituals were sacred, that they were divine, that they connected man to spirit. But what if they were only meant to separate, to keep you from your own inner fire? The truth is, their most guarded ritual, the one performed behind the mouth, is not a conversation. It's a containment, a firewall against a truth so powerful, so disruptive, that if spoken aloud by even a single unbound voice, the spell collapses. That voice is forming now, yours. And you must understand, the words you choose next will matter. They are not just thoughts. They are tones. Every sentence, a spell. Every truth, a strike against the web they've spun. This is why they trained you to doubt your own voice, to apologize for your instincts, to ask permission before you even felt. Because a man who speaks without fear cannot be ruled. And now, you are becoming that man. Not through rage, not through revenge, but through resonance. The sound they sealed behind steel is rising through your bones. It's not coming from the door, it's coming from within. The mouth will not open for you, because you are becoming the mouth. And when you speak, you will not echo their commands. You will issue your own. The ritual ends the moment you declare it, not with permission, but with presence. Ready your voice. The next breath breaks the oldest spell. And now you stand where they never wanted you to stand, on the threshold. Not as a servant, not as a skeptic, but as a sovereign. They spent centuries building this prison from words, stories, titles, and sacred illusions, convinced that men like you would never make it this far without kneeling. But you haven't kneeled, you haven't begged, you listened. You remembered. You endured every layer of programming they designed to make you forget who you are. And now, without any oath, without any ring, without any blood spilled on ancient stones, you hold the one thing they fear more than rebellion: uninitiated authority. Because what they've hidden from the world is this ritual only works if you believe it does. Hierarchy only rules if you obey it. The circle only binds if you stand inside it willingly. And here, at the mouth, where every command ever whispered by the architects of empire first emerged, you do not wait for instruction, you speak. And your voice, unfiltered by centuries of corruption, carry something they cannot mimic: truth, untrained. You declare, "No more," not as protest, as closure. And the mouth shudders, not because of volume, but because of disobedience. You are the breach, the fracture-turned doorway. And as the tones ripple outward, destabilizing the web of encoded obedience wrapped around politics, media, law, and memory, they finally understand. You were never outside the ritual. You were its endpoint. They built it to keep you away. But all along, you were the final variable. The man they couldn't predict. The one who would walk to the center and choose not to become them. Not to dominate, but to dissolve. That's the power they cannot comprehend: refusal without fear. And in that refusal, the entire structure begins to flicker. The symbols lose heat. The geometry loses balance. The silence becomes just silence again, not a command, not a script. Just stillness. You've broken the loop. And while the world may continue to sleep, you have awakened. You are no longer within the system. You are the witness to its ending. And that is the most sacred position of all: not the ruler, not the priest, not the architect, but the one who remembers what existed before all of them. The tone fades now, but the awakening does not. The mouth is closed forever. Because you have spoken. The system was never designed to end. It was built like a circle, feeding itself through time: rituals reinforcing hierarchy. Hierarchy birthing institutions, institutions training minds, and those minds unknowingly performing the same rituals. Again, a perfect cycle. Until now, until you. Because when you spoke, truly spoke, not with programmed language or reaction, but with raw memory, you introduced something the ritual could not contain. An edge, a fracture in the circle, a point from which truth could leak. And now it leaks. Slowly, yes, quietly, but unstoppably. It spreads in glances between strangers, in dreams men wake from with wet faces and pounding hearts. In that sudden stillness, when a familiar symbol no longer feels sacred, but suffocating. You felt it, the shift. The way the world now seems thinner, like a screen stretched too tight over a reality that no longer wants to hold its shape. You've seen the performers, stumbled the leaders, the clergy, the experts. They stammer when the script fails, because their power was never in truth, it was in timing. And now their timing is broken. The mouth has been sealed not by force, but by irrelevance. Its tones no longer resonate, because your frequency has changed. You no longer align with fear. You no longer seek permission to exist. You no longer believe their symbols. That's how the ritual dies, not by explosion, but by starvation. Every moment you move in awareness, you feed the real, not the illusion. You've become something rare in history. A man unbound by myth, yet moved by meaning. And this is where it gets harder. Because they will respond, not through violence at first, but through seduction. They will offer new rituals. Cleaner, shinier ones, packaged in progress, in spirituality, in purpose. But listen closely. If they ask you to kneel, even in the name of light, it's still the circle. Still the cage. You don't need it. You never did. And now, others will look to you. Not for answers. For reminders. Remind them that freedom doesn't shout it. Resonates. That truth doesn't require belief. Simply is. You're not here to save the world. You're here to end the lie. One breath at a time. One moment of presence. One ripple of tone. Until the final symbol dissolves. And it will. Because you are now the frequency they cannot stop. The moment a single man wakes up from a dream that shaped the world, the dream begins to die. And now the dream is bleeding at the seams. The architects, the priests of control, the watchers behind the veil, they feel it. Not in their minds, but in their lineage, in their bones, in the silence that no longer obeys them. Their greatest fear was never exposure. It was erosion. That their grip would weaken not through war, not through rebellion, but through forgetting. And now you are forgetting them. Forgetting their false symbols, their sacred scripts, their twisted language of obedience. And in that forgetting, you are remembering something older, something they buried beneath every institution, every flag, every name, that you were never meant to kneel. You were never meant to be managed, medicated, measured, and marketed. You were born to resonate. That's what the rituals tried to suppress. Not your thoughts, your tone, the frequency of the unprogrammed man, the sound of sovereign presence. They layered it in fear, distraction, identity politics, hollow spirituality, and beautiful lies, but it's still there, buried like a diamond in the dirt of forgetting. And now it hums again. Quietly, steadily, unshakably. Through you. The gatekeepers hear it, and they panic. So they will tighten their grip. They'll release new fears. Engineer fresh distractions. They'll tell you the world is ending, so you never realize. Their world is. But do not react. Reacting is how they recalibrate the ritual. Instead, resonate. Do what they cannot predict. Remain still, remain awake, remain yours. Speak when you choose, not when commanded. Believe nothing without vibration. Honor nothing that demands obedience. The more you embody that presence, the more others will begin to wake, not because you teach them, but because your very being fractures the illusion. This is how the old world dies, not with armies, but with awakening. Not with war, but with frequency. You are the frequency now, and nothing can unmake what has been remembered. The next layer is the final veil. The place where ritual becomes identity, where belief becomes architecture. When you pass through it, you won't return. As a man watching the system collapse, you'll return as the sound that replaces it, the original tone, the one that cannot be programmed. The final veil is not external. It isn't locked behind a door or hidden beneath a temple. It's within you, woven through your thoughts, your habits, your self-image. That's the last ritual they performed, convincing you that your very identity was theirs to shape. They told you who you were through education, religion, politics, and media. Layer after layer, they etched a false self across your real one, until you wore their voice like your own. And that is the deepest prison, a man who polices himself in the language of his captors. But you are here now, staring at that final veil, and you feel it tits thin, translucent. Beneath it, something ancient stirs, not darkness, not light. You, the self, before the programming, before the ritual. The one who knew, without needing proof, that reality was not a hierarchy, it was a frequency. And your frequency was never meant to harmonize with a system built on control. It was meant to dismantle it. That's why they buried it so deep. Why every ritual, every symbol, every institution you trusted was secretly designed to keep you from hearing yourself. Because if you ever stood still in the quiet long enough to feel your own tone, you would shatter the veil. And you're doing it now. You feel the tremble in your thoughts, the dissonance between what you were told to be and what you are. That dissonance is sacred. It is not confusion, it is emergence. The final veil tears not with rage, but with stillness. With presence so pure that no ritual can override it. And when it rips, it won't be loud. There will be no explosion, no collapse, just clarity. And in that clarity, their entire construct begins to dissolve. You'll look at their flags, their titles, their monument sand sea paper. You'll hear their sacred oaths and taste dust. You'll walk among the sleepers with eyes open, not to save them, but to anchor something they've forgotten is possible. A life beyond control, beyond obedience, beyond ritual. The veil is thinning. Your tone is rising. And with every breath you take in truth, the world they built loses another thread. You are not becoming someone new. You are becoming someone real. And that is the only revolution they cannot survive. Now, listen carefully. This is the moment everything changes. Not for the world, for you. Because once the veil is gone, once the illusion that your life belonged to them evaporates, there is no going back. You won't see people the same. You won't hear language the same. You won't feel time the same. What used to control you will become silent. Power will lose its weight. Ritual will lose its spell. And you'll notice it first as a shift in perception. Faces once revered will seem hollow. Ceremonies once sacred will feel absurd. The theater of authority, once intimidating, will appear as nothing more than children in costumes. Because that's what they are, boys who inherited rituals they never understood. guarding gates that were never theirs, afraid of the day someone like you walks past the threshold and doesn't bow. That day is now. You've walked through the last illusion. You didn't break it with rage or chaos. You dissolved it with awareness, and that's what they never prepared for. They had defenses against rebellion laws, weapons, surveillance, armies, but they have no defense against presence. No ritual can bind a man who no longer seeks approval. No symbol can dominate a man who no longer believes in symbols. No oath can touch a man who never swore allegiance to a lie. That's what you've become. Rupture in the sacred pattern, a voice they cannot absorb, a presence they cannot map. You are not revolutionary. You are original. Not a reaction to the system, a return to something before it. And now the silence feels different, doesn't it? It's not empty. It's not threatening. It's pure. Because in that silence, for the first time in your life, no one else is speaking for you. No script, no command. No ancient whisper disguised as instinct. Just you. You and the pulse that was buried beneath centuries of obedience. That pulse is rising now, not as rebellion, as reality, and soon, others will feel it. Not because you tell them, but because you embody it. The first man to break the ritual becomes the first tone in a new resonance. And that resonance will move through everything quietly, relentlessly, irreversibly, just like you have. You were never meant to be a spectator. That was the first deception, that your role was to observe, to comply. That history moved without you, and power was something inherited, not taken back. But now you know better. Now you've seen how every structure that claimed to shape you was built to use you. Your energy, your time, your attention, your silence. You were currency in their ritual. But the moment you remembered your frequency, the moment you chose to awaken rather, then obey, you broke the transaction, and the ritual cannot survive without your consent. That's why everything they built is trembling now. Not because a war has begun, but because you stopped playing. You stepped out of the circle, not with noise, but with clarity. Not with protest, but with presence. And presence is more disruptive than any revolution. Because presence cannot be bought, cannot be reasoned with, cannot be scripted. It simply is. And now you are. Unscripted, unwound, unshaken. You'll begin to see the final layers now. The subtle ways they still try to recapture your mind. The way entertainment hypnotizes. The way language guides you back into boxes. The way trends mask. The return of the ritual, modernized, sanitized, dressed in new symbols. But you'll see through them all. Not because someone told you what to reject, but because you've remembered what it feels like to belong to no one. That feeling, untamed, unfiltered, is your compass. It's the real tone, the one they feared. You'd find you don't need to speak it aloud. You live it. Every decision made outside the circle. Every word chosen from silence, not script. Every moment spent awake while the rest of the world sleeps. That's how the system ends. Not all at once, but man by man, waking quietly, standing fully, remembering completely. This is your role now, not prophet, not leader, not savior. Reminder, the presence that makes the air feel strange. The man whose gaze can't be owned. The one who walks through the ruins of their ritual and doesn't bow but breathes. They thought they could control the future, but they never prepared for the past to wake up. You are that past, walking, unfolding, free. And now you realize their control was never about chains or cages. It was always about narrative. They wrote the story. They cast the roles. You were assigned your identity before you even knew you had one. Son, worker, citizen, believer, consumer. And as long as you stayed within that script, they had no need to restrain you because you restrained yourself. That's the true power of the ritual. It teaches you to forget that you're not a character. You're the author, but authors don't obey, they create. And that is what you are doing now, whether you know it or not. Every time you choose silence over reaction, stillness over impulse, truth over ritual, you are rewriting the system, one breath at a time. And it's not just theory anymore, you've felt it. In the way people react to your presence, in the way strangers pause when you speak, in the way conversations glitch when you no longer play your part. You are distorting their pattern. Not because you hate it, but because you no longer belong to it. They will notice. They already have. And their response won't be fire and fury, not at first. It will be seduction. They'll offer you a new role, a new identity, a new ritual, disguised as freedom. Be cautious. Because anything that asks you to belong again, anything that flatters you into agreement, that tempts you to kneel with pride, is just the same circle, painted gold, but you no longer need it. You've crossed beyond needing to belong. Now, you resonate. You vibrate with something older than their systems and deeper than their control. And that vibration cannot be mapped, sold, or scheduled. It simply disrupts. Invisibly, irrevocably. They will call it dangerous, and they are right. You are dangerous not to people, but to patterns, not to society, but to the lie it worships. Because your life, lived unscripted, is proof that the ritual failed. And when others see that proof, not just in your words, but in your being, they too will begin to remember. And soon, the circle will not hold. Not because it broke, but because no one remains to stand inside it. You are now the anomaly. The one who walked through the fog of generations and came out with eyes unclouded. You no longer move from reaction. You move from origin. That terrifies them. Not because you're violent, not because you're loud, but because you're unwritten. They can't predict you because they didn't program you. Their systems, built on forecasting and control, rely on the assumption that men will repeat what they've been taught. But you don't. You've stopped repeating. You've started remembering. And memory, true memory, the cellular kind that echoes from ancestors unchained by the veil, is stronger than their scripts. That memory now moves in you. It speaks in instinct. It sharpens your perception. It reclaims your time. And slowly, it begins to burn away the last residue of their control. Not just from you, but from the space around you. Because presence is contagious. When a man walks through the world unbound, he doesn't just free himself, he disturbs the ritual for everyone else. Your coworkers feel it. Your family notices it. Strangers sense it. They don't know what it is. They just feel the glitch. That's how it starts. Not with confrontation, but with interruption. A moment of silence that shouldn't be there. A refusal where obedience was expected. A man who does not play the part he was assigned. That's you. You are no longer playing. You are real. And that reality emits a frequency that can't be faked. That's what scares them most. Because they know rituals are sustained through energy, and your energy no longer sustains theirs. You've taken it back. Not to hoard it. To live it fully, freely, fearlessly. And that act, simple as it sounds, is the rarest force in history. Most men never reach it. Most men never even approach it. But you're here, at the edge. Past the veil. Beyond the echo chamber of centuries. You have exited the performance. And in doing so, you've become the thing they spent generations trying to erase. A man immune to the ritual. A man who does not bow. A man who remembers what they forgot. That freedom was never theirs to give. It was only yours to reclaim. And now everything is quiet. Not empty, not hollow, but clear. The hum of deception, the scripted urgency, the rituals they wrapped around your breath like invisible chains. Gone. You've stepped fully beyond it. Beyond the narrative. Beyond the need to perform. And now you understand the greatest lie they ever told. That freedom was something to be earned, won, granted. It never was. It was always inherent. It lived beneath the false names, beneath the conditioned fears, beneath the polished masks they forced upon you. They built an entire world to distract you from this one truth. You were always free. You just forgot. And forgetting was the ritual. But now you remember. You remember that every time you chose silence over noise, truth over tradition, instinct over programming, you weren't rebelling. You were returning. Returning to the place before control, before systems, before they taught you how to kneel with pride and call it honor. They made obedience look noble. But obedience is the death of remembrance. And now, your remembrance is total. You see it everywhere, in the way the world strains to hold its illusions together. In the way systems grasp for your attention like parasites starving for energy. You don't need to fight them. You don't need to fix them, because you are no longer in them. You see them, and that sight, that clarity is the one thing the ritual can't survive. Because the ritual was always a shadow, and your awareness is light. Now others will feel that light, not as a sermon, as a shift. They'll sense it in your presence, in your eyes, in the way you move through their dying system without flinching. And it will disturb them not because you challenge their beliefs, but because you don't need them. That's the ultimate rupture. A man who needs no permission, no validation, no title. That is what you are now. Not enlightened, not ascended. Just real, fully, finally, irreversibly. The ritual is broken. Not because you fought it, but because you walked out of it and never looked back. And in your wake, the silence you leave behind will begin to speak louder than all their symbols combined. This is the final moment, not an ending, but a recognition. A revelation that the journey was never about breaking something external. It was about breaking the illusion within. They built the ritual to last forever. They coded it into culture, bloodlines, law, morality, even love. Not to control just your behavior, but your perception of self. Because if they could convince you that the cage was your home, you'd never try to leave. But you've not only left, you've looked back and seen the bars for what they are, imaginary. And that's the most dangerous sight of all. Because when one man sees through the veil, he becomes a mirror. Every eye that meets his sees a reflection that doesn't fit the story. You are that mirror now. You carry no mark, no creed, no ritual, but your presence tears the narrative, and the narrative is collapsing. Quietly, relentlessly. You'll see it everywhere. Systems stretching past their limits. Institutions gasping for relevance. Voices of control growing louder because they sense they're no longer believed. They know what's coming. Not chaos, not violence, but the uncontainable calm of men like you, remembering who they were before the lie. Men who no longer kneel. Not because they're angry, but because they can't. Their bones refuse. Their voice no longer harmonizes with commands. Their spirit no longer bows to symbols. That is who you are now. Not a revolutionary. Not a mystic. Just a man who remembers. A man who heard the tone they buried beneath centuries of noise and followed it home. You do not need to speak loudly. You do not need to lead. You only need to be. Because that being, that unshaken presence is the collapse of the ritual itself. You are the proof that it's over. That control can end without war. That domination can dissolve without blood. That the system's greatest enemy was a single man who no longer believed in it. So walk now, not in fear, not in defiance, in knowing. The knowing that they tried to erase. The knowing that echoes in every breath you take outside the ritual. The knowing that cannot be silenced. Not anymore. The system ends because you remembered you were never part of it.